man has been killed in front of me.
In the autumn of 2002, a ruthless killer stalked the suburbs of Washington, D.C.
He only needed a split second and he could take them out.
People were murdered at random.
White people, black people, young, old, children.
And then the killer vanished without a trace.
How do you find a ghost?
Millions lived in fear.
I felt like the water was over my head.
The sniper's high-powered rifles sent shockwaves across the country.
People like this exist in our world.
One of the largest manhunts in American history spread from coast to coast. There were many false leads, but eventually the murderer became careless.
Life and death. John Allen Muhammad was born as John Allen Williams to Ernest and Ava Williams on December 31st, 1960 in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. His time of death was at 9 p.m. on November 10th, 2009 by lethal injection at the Greenville Correctional Center in Jarrett, Virginia. He died at the age of 48. Personal life. Quick facts. John Allen Muhammad was a father of 4 children, married twice, divorced twice, and joined the Nation of Islam in 1987, which is why at the time of his death, his last name was Muhammad. In his childhood, the family moved to New Orleans when his mother was diagnosed with breast cancer. She died when Muhammad was 4 years old, and thereafter Muhammad was raised by his aunt in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Military service. Muhammad, at the age of 17, enlisted as a combat engineer in the Louisiana Army National Guard at Baton Rouge in August 1978. In this capacity, he served from 1978 to 1985. He then went on to join the 15th Engineer Battalion at Fort Lewis in 1985. After which, he was assigned to the 84th Engineering Company and the 2nd Armed Cavalry Regiment in Nuremberg, Germany, 1990. He also served in the Gulf War with a company that dismantled Iraqi chemical warfare rockets in 1991. In 1992, served with the 13th Engineers at Fort Ord in California. Went back to Fort Lewis to the 14th Engineering Battalion in 1993 and went to serve with the Oregon Guard from 1994 to 1995. Throughout John Muhammad's active duty career, he served as a combat engineer whose main purpose encompasses landmine laying, removal, demolition, and combat construction. He also did time as a metal worker and a water transport specialist. John Muhammad's training consisted of basic and advanced engineering practice in 1979, followed by basic winter operations in 1987, and completed primary leadership development in 1988, and was qualified as an expert marksman with an M16. Over John Muhammad's career, he was awarded with the Southwest Asia Service Medal and the Kuwait Liberation Medal for his participation in the Persian Gulf War. He was also awarded the Army Achievement Medal, the Army Services Ribbon, and the National Defense Service Medal, in addition to the Non-Commissioned Officer Professional Development Ribbon. Significant events. After John Muhammad's military service, he became both verbally and emotionally abusive towards his second wife, Mildred. As things began to escalate, she wanted a divorce, and thereafter, he moved out. Out of fear for her safety, she took out a restraining order against him. But despite all of this, he was able to maintain visitation rights for his kids. But out of the blue one night, he kidnapped them. The main theory behind Muhammad's random killing spree was because his end goal was eventually to kill his wife and be able to claim custody of his children without being suspected of being the one who killed his wife.
Nature of offense. Before we cover the timeline of John Allen Muhammad's crimes, it's important to mention that he did not commit these offenses by himself. He had an accomplice, Lee Melville, a 17-year-old that he first met in 1999 in Antigua and later informally adopted. Despite a relatively happy childhood, Lee changed when parents divorced and he was kept away from his father. A court psychologist found that Melville was a people pleaser and was heavily influenced by Muhammad, the dominant personality in this serial killer team. Muhammad began DC sniper attacks on October 2nd by shattering the window with a bullet of the craft store in Aspen Hill, Maryland. Less than an hour, another shot was made. A 55-year-old man was killed while walking across a parking lot. Although the shootings were not initially recognized as being connected, law enforcement authorities soon realized that those two acts of violence were just the first of what would be more than a dozen linked shootings over the next 23 days. Next attack happened by the end of the day on October 3rd. 5 more victims had been shot and killed in the Washington metropolitan area. Investigators determined that bullets from the first 7 shootings were fired from the same rifle. On the morning of October 7, a 13-year-old boy was shot and injured in front of his middle school. Then, from October 9 to October 14, another 3 attacks were made in the same area. During the Beltway shooting, Muhammad and Melville killed their victims with a semi-automatic assault rifle stolen by Melville. The victims were all completely random and of different ages and sexes, and were killed with single shots. Many of the victims were shot at or near gas stations. The shots were fired from their car, which had been fitted with a small hole in the trunk just above the license plate from which they aimed. DC Sniper and his partner left tarot cards as calling cards at several crime scenes. One notable one, the death card, had the phrase "Call me God" written on the front and "For you, Mr. Police," quote, "Call me God," and "Do not release to the press" on the back. At some point, they also left a ransom note demanding $10 million. On October 24, Muhammad and Melville were found sleeping in the car and arrested. A month-long trial with hundreds of pieces of evidence, including a series of pictures implicating the two as being terrorists, took place. In the end, Muhammad was sentenced to death in September and executed by lethal injection on November 10, 2009. He asked for chicken with red sauce at their last meal and declined to make a final statement. Melville was sentenced to life in prison without parole.
Offender profile. The type of multiple murder is spree. Killing occurred in one psychological event. Typology. This case does not precisely fit mass or serial killer. However, there was several months cooling off period between mass killings, which makes Muhammad a serial killer. This case has organized crime scene patterns. Mohammed used planned strategy, he used planned weapon, which is firearms, he also used vehicle, he didn't left any evidence, and he had transient special mobility. Mohammed meets organized serial killer characteristics. First of all, he had adequate social skills and average intelligence. Also, he worked in military, therefore he had skilled employment experience. He lived far from crime scene. Mohammed had superior self-image, and it's also known that he had no mental illnesses. All of those characteristics make Mohammed an organized serial killer. The serial killer typology in this case is mission-oriented. Mohammed believed that his mission is to eradicate undesirable victims who are US citizens. He was instantly motivated by ideological cause, sense of worth. In this case, it was jihad against the United States. Jihad is determined as fight against the enemies of Islam. Moreover, methods are planned and organized.
Risk factors. What makes a serial killer? There is ongoing debate in psychology about the influence of nature versus nurture. Some people believe that personality and behavior are predetermined by genetics, while others argue that environment is the deciding factor. In reality, we are a complex combination of biological and environmental factors. No single factor is responsible for the development of a serial killer. Abnormalities in brain development and traumatic brain injuries can affect cognition, the mental process of collecting, processing, and storing information gathered from the outside world, as well as a person's behavior and emotions. Brain injuries and defects in the brain can negatively impact cognitive functions such as memory, attention, concentration, language, perception, and executive function, which is responsible for higher thinking and goal formation. People who have impaired executive function often have difficulties with planning and organization, reasoning, problem solving, and impulse control. Behaviors and emotions can also be negatively affected. People can exhibit disinhibition or a lack of restraint and become more aggressive and irritable. They may also develop depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and increasing levels of frustration or anger. During his appeal, John Allen Muhammad argued that he should not have been convicted because his brain scans showed 3 abnormalities: a shrunken cortex, a cavum septum pellucidum, and a shortening of his corpus callosum. It was possible that he was born with these abnormalities or that they were the result of extreme physical abuse during his childhood. The prefrontal cortex is the cortical region of the brain essential for organizing and controlling higher cognitive functions and behaviors. The septum pellucidum usually fuses 3 to 6 months after birth and plays an important role in controlling aggression while promoting prosocial and bonding behaviors. Prosocial behaviors are those that are designed to benefit others or society as a whole. People are also exhibiting prosocial behaviors when they obey the law and conform to socially accepted behaviors to protect others. This is a side-by-side comparison of what a normal septum pellucidum looks like on the left and an abnormal unfused one on the right. The corpus callosum connects the left and right hemispheres of the brain to allow for proper communication and function. Biological and genetic factors are only one side of the story. Environmental factors can have an immense influence on the development of a person's personality and self-concept. Childhood abuse and neglect can cause long-term harm to physical and psychological development. Victims of child abuse and neglect often have difficulty forming meaningful relationships. The lack of healthy attachment can impair their ability to cope with stress, and they often have difficulty controlling and expressing their emotions, leading to anxiety, depression, and hostility towards others. Furthermore, physical abuse and neglect can impact the body physiologically. Victims can develop weakened immune systems from constant stress and are at higher risk of chronic illness. One study showed that the majority of persistent violent male offenders they surveyed reported that they suffered some sort of physical abuse during their childhood. During his appeal, John Allen Muhammad's siblings testified about the violent physical abuse they suffered growing up. One shocking story recounted how his grandfather forced John Allen Muhammad to place his hand on the spark plug of a lawnmower and pulled the cord to electrocute him for fun. He was also regularly beaten by his uncle, Felton Holiday. In 1962, his uncle beat a teenager with developmental disabilities to death with a leather strap during his tenure as a guard at a reform school in Louisiana. John Allen Muhammad's mother died when he was 4 years old, and his father soon abandoned the family after her death. He was moved into his grandparents' home where he was neglected and regularly abused. There was a lack of positive parental influence during his formative years, from which he could learn and model positive behaviors and coping skills. John Allen Muhammad was also unsuccessful as a family man. He was married twice and divorced twice. Mildred Muhammad, his second wife, alleged that he physically and verbally abused her throughout their marriage. She was granted a restraining order and full custody of their children. In 2000, John Allen Muhammad kidnapped their children and brought them to Antigua for 18 months. John Allen Muhammad may have felt shunned and ostracized by his family and by his peers. Ostracism is the act of deliberately ignoring, rejecting, or excluding someone from a group or social setting. Research has shown that ostracism increases risky decision-making and negative emotions. It can cause negative health effects and mental health problems such as anxiety, substance abuse, and depression. Studies have also found a link between ostracism and aggression, where ostracized individuals have been found to become more aggressive and violent. In conclusion, the case of the DC sniper and John Allen Muhammad was very complex. Many questions were left unanswered as John Allen Muhammad maintained his silence about the motives of his crimes until his death. One thing was for certain. In 2002, he left a wake of terror that changed the lives of his victims and their families forever. Thank you for listening to our presentation, and we hope you take the time to answer our discussion questions.